You're listening to RcFlightCast podcast with Frank Betts. All right, welcome to RcFlightCast. I'm your host, Frank, and today's episode is all about the beginnings of RC flying, where it all started, and how the hobby evolved, and why it's still thriving today. Excuse me. Whether you're new to the hobby or just, love the history, this one's for you. So the early spark, pre-RC aviation. To understand the beginnings of RC flying, we've got to go back before radios were even part of the equation. The roots of radio-controlled aviation start with free flight models way back in the early 1900s. These were rubber-powered or small gas-powered model airplanes that once launched were on their own. You had no control, and you just watch and hope they didn't end up in a tree. At that time, aviation itself was still in its infancy. The Wright brothers had just flown, and tinkering with small aircraft was the happiest playground for understanding flight principles. And then came control line flying in the 40s and 50s. It's where a plane is tethered by lines to the pilot on the ground. You can control pitch by moving your hand up and down, which was a big step forward, but still a far cry from true remote control. And the first true radio control flights, the big leaps came with radio control systems post-war World War II. Blah, blah, blah. Can't read my own notes here. Let's see here. Yeah, the 50s saw the earliest practical radio-controlled model planes, but they were rudimentary and inexpensive. Early radios were typically single-channel pulse systems where pilots could only give brief pulses to control one surface, and usually the rudder. It was more like guiding the plane rather than piloting it. And these early setups were tube-based transmitters and receivers, heavy and unreliable by today's standards. You'd carry a suitcase-sized transmitter to the field and pray the receiver didn't glitch, which they often did. The 60s and 70s, the golden age of RC beginnings in the 60s. Radio technology took a leap forward with transistor-based electronics, making radios lighter and slightly more reliable. Multi-channel radios emerged, giving control of rudder, elevator, throttle, and eventually ailerons. Brands like Kraft Systems and Orbit Electronics led the charge. And by the 70s, proportional control became standard, and that meant your stick movements on the transmitter can now proportionately move control surfaces. No more all-or-nothing controls. Planes were mostly balsa wood kits, requiring extensive building, covering with heat-shrink materials like monocoat, and a lot of patience. And if you wanted to fly RC in the 70s, you had to be a builder first, then a flyer. There were no ready-to-fly kits. I remember that because, early 70s, my dad bought a MRC radio, 5-channel, 72 megahertz. When you went out to the field, because everybody was pretty much on the same signals there, you had colored clothespins with your frequency on it. So when you went up to go fly, you went out to where the clothespins were sitting, and if you saw your particular frequency there, that meant it was okay to go ahead and fly, and you just clipped it to your antenna, went out and did your thing. Then when you got done, you'd set that clothespin back down on the table, and then somebody else would come up, and you just go from there. Otherwise, and I've seen it back in the day when somebody would accidentally turn their radio on to adjust something on their plane there, and bam, it would glitch somebody else up there flying, and their plane would just take off or dive, and then you'd hear a lot of screaming. So, yeah. And my dad, like I said, he was the builder. I'd just fly them. I have no patience for that. Even to this day, I don't have patience. I mean, I'll tinker with stuff, this easy to build stuff, but I'm mostly ARF or when I get into the 3D printed stuff, I'll do that. But that meticulous stuff that he did was just amazing. He just, all this balsa sticks, he cut them out, put them all together, cover them with the monocoat or the silk, and then he would cover the silk with a clear coat, and then eventually got to paint it up. But yeah, he didn't want anything to do with the flying part. He was definitely the builder. And then one day, he told me, he goes, "You crashed that plane again." He goes, "I'm done rebuilding them because you're just messing around too much." And it wasn't long before I tangled with a telephone pole over at the school. Sure enough, packed up our stuff, and that was it. So, anyway, the 80s, that brought growth and stability. The 80s, saw RC flying grow immensely. Radios became more affordable, and brands like Futaba, which I have, Junior, JR, and Airtronics became household names among hobbyists. And we saw the standardization of 72 megahertz FM radios in the U.S., which reduced glitches and interference that plagued the earlier AM systems. And on the airframe side, ARFs, almost ready to fly kits, became available instead of weeks or months of building, and you could have an airplane built in a weekend. You had your nitro engines were king, and 2-stroke and 4-stroke glow engines. The smell of nitro and that oily mess were just part of the scene. Clubs and AMA-sanctioned fields popped up everywhere, and RC flying became a weekend ritual for thousands. I'm glad I was in the 70s for that kind of stuff. I was in a RC group called the Thunderbirds, and it was over by Fort Custer there, here in Michigan where I live. And it was popular. Every weekend there was always 10, 15 people out there, and then you'd have cookouts and really good times out there. That place is long gone. I've always wanted to take a metal detector and go out through there and see if I could find pieces and parts of stuff, because we lost a lot of planes out there, that's for sure. Those glitches, those early radios like that were pretty unpredictable at times. But anyway, the 90s, technology tightens up in the 90s. Things improved even more. Computer radios arrived, giving pilots the ability to program mixes, exponential controls, and multiple model memories. Electric flight was still in its infancy. Brushed motors and NiCad batteries made for heavy, low-performance models, but the seeds were planted, and yes, they were. Meanwhile, companies like Great Plains, SIG, and Hangar 9 made ARF kits better, lighter, and more accessible. Still, for the average pilot, the routine was build it, fuel it, tune it, and hope the radio didn't glitch mid-flight. So then we come up to the 2000s, the electric and 2.4 gigahertz revolution. The early 2000s brought in two game changers. Brushless motors and LiPo batteries suddenly. Electric flight wasn't just for small or underpowered models. Brushless motors paired with lightweight, high-capacity lithium polymer batteries meant we could build planes that flew longer, stronger, and with less mass than nitro. And the 2.4 gigahertz radio systems, when Spectrum introduced 2.4 gigahertz radios, they wiped out frequency conflicts. No more worrying about someone turning on a transmitter in your frequency and crashing your plane, like I mentioned earlier. This made RC flying more reliable, more accessible, and more enjoyable. The 2010s, foam planes and RTF explosion, then came the foam plane boom. And EPO and EPP foams made durable, light, and easy to repair models. And companies like Hobby Zone, E-Flight, Park Zone brought Ready to Fly, or RTF for short, and Bind and Fly, BNF, options to the masses. You could buy a plane, charge the battery, and be flying that afternoon. Simulators also became widely available and much better. Tools like Real Flight and Phoenix RC let beginners practice without risking a real plane. I'm still using that to this day. Now we get to the present day. Tech on tap today. The hobby is more accessible than ever. Here's what beginners enjoy now that was unimaginable back then. You got stabilized flight controllers, gyro-assisted flying to keep the plane level, return to home features on some planes, ultra micro planes that can be flown indoors, 3D printed planes you can print at home with a desktop printer, FPV or first person view, flying with goggles on, seeing from the plane's perspective. And radios today, full color screens, telemetry, Bluetooth programming, things that were science fiction in the 70s. So true. Why this history matters, understanding the roots of RC flying gives you a deep appreciation for how far we've come. In the past, this hobby was for the dedicated builder and tinkerer, someone who didn't mind breaking a plane and spending weeks fixing it. Today you can jump right in, build if you want, or buy RTF, fly nitro, electric, or even gas. The choice is wide open. Is RC flying still alive? You bet it is. Thanks to evolving tech, a vibrant online community, and manufacturers constantly innovating, RC flying is thriving. And there's a style and price point for everyone, from a $100 beginner foamy to $5,000 scale jets. And let's not forget the sense of wonder, that thrill of taking something you control and sending it soaring into the sky that never has gotten old. And wrapping up, so that's your crash course, pun intended, on the beginnings of RC flying. And if you just started or RC curious, knowing the history shows just how exciting and accessible things are today. So next time you power up your transmitter, just remember, you're part of a hobby that took over 70 years to evolve into what it is today. So thanks for joining me on this episode of RcFlightCast. I'm Frank once again, and I'll catch you in the next one, where we'll keep exploring the skies one topic at a time. See ya.